But the main focus of Lincoln's interest is Louisiana. If he could build a loyal, functioning government there, it would be a significant blow to the Confederacy. So in 1863, he's trying that. The first thing he has to do is remove General Butler, who has become very unpopular, to say the least, with the white population of New Orleans. Butler, even people loyal to the Union, didn't like the character of Butler's rule there. He set up special courts to deal with Confederates. He hanged one man for tearing down the American flag somewhere. He set Confederate prisoners to work building military fortifications. He also actually set up a whole public works system to pave the streets. They hadn't managed to do that in 250 years of slavery. And to set up a drainage system. You know, it's pretty wet down in New Orleans, as you may remember from Hurricane Katrina and other things, and it needed a modern. He actually improves the city enormously and becomes very popular among working class people, both black and white, because he's actually hiring them to work on this public works projects. But the most famous or infamous thing Butler did was to issue this order stating that any woman who insulted soldiers, U.S. soldiers, and there were, you know, women would do this. They'd yell at them, or they'd throw things at them, or out the window. Any woman who insulted the army would be considered, quote, women of the street plying their trade. In other words, that they'd be considered prostitutes and punished accordingly. This did not comport with the self-image of a lot of the women of New Orleans. And Butler was very unpopular for this. But anyway, Lincoln replaces him with General Nathaniel Banks, who's a much more moderate Republican, and tells Banks, I want you to set up a government there. Now, in some ways, it seemed like not a bad prospect. New Orleans had a lot of pro-Union sentiment. As I had said before, many of the sugar planters nearby were not big secessionists at all because they wanted the federal tariff on sugar to continue, which the Confederacy did not continue. Secondly, there was a pretty large foreign-born population in New Orleans. New Orleans was one of the very few places in the South that has actually gotten significant immigration before the Civil War from Europe, so there were Irish and Germans and others who were not pro-Confederate. And there was, there were a lot of merchants there who traded with the North, so there was a basis. And then, of course, there was a significant free black community. One of the most important free black communities in the country, dating back to the days of the French. These were people who were highly educated, many of them very skilled. They were craftsmen, they were business people, and they were certainly very pro-union. But their presence led to a split in the pro-union movement because they're demanding their own rights. You know, they say, well, yeah, we want to set up a government, but we should have the right to vote. They're not talking about the slaves. The free Negro population is totally qualified. They're certainly as qualified as anyone else to take part in government, more qualified. They're better educated than many of the white population. So why shouldn't they, as loyal Americans, be part of the system? On the other hand, giving them the right to vote might alienate a lot of the white population. So it's a very complicated situation for Banks and Lincoln. Lincoln tells Banks, I want you to go ahead and set up a new government with a new state constitution abolishing slavery. That's the way to get rid of slavery, by state action. Emancipation, as I said, is now part of wartime Reconstruction. And it's Louisiana which leads Lincoln in December 1863 to make his first public pronouncement on Reconstruction. This is Lincoln's plan of Reconstruction, which he outlines in his message to Congress of December 1863. I put plan in quotation marks because one thing, if you know my view of Lincoln, is he never had a totally fixed plan. He was flexible, he was cunning, he was capable of growth. One of the biggest myths about Reconstruction is that Lincoln had a set plan that he always adhered to, and had he not been killed, he would have just stuck with this plan forever. That is completely unrealistic. But anyway, this is Lincoln's plan as of December 1863. How should we set up? Now, it's offered to the whole South, but Louisiana is really the place he's thinking about. He offers an amnesty. Any Southern white who will take an oath of loyalty to the government, future loyalty, doesn't matter what you did in the past. Now you say, oh, forget it, I'm not fighting anymore or whatever, I'm taking an oath of loyalty to the United States, plus I accept the end of slavery. That's now part of the deal. You have to take it. Now, and interesting, we'll see more about this in Reconstruction. One of the interesting things at this period is people really took oaths very seriously. There's a lot of, what kind of oath should people take? You know, hey, I'll take an oath, yeah, give me back my property, I'll take any oath you want, you know. No, people supposedly took it seriously. So if a person took an oath, it was assumed he would actually act accordingly. So on both sides, I think, what kind of oath should we ask people to take? Well, in this case, it's to support the Constitution and all the acts of the government relating to slavery. Lincoln says not to include emancipation in Reconstruction would be, quote, a cruel and astounding breach of faith toward the slaves. So you can't just leave it out. But having taken that oath, all their rights are restored. Their right to property, particularly other than slave property, obviously. All their land or whatever property might be in danger is, because Congress has passed confiscation acts which open the possibility of confiscating the property. They never really enforced much, but of confiscating the property of rebels. Lincoln offers these oaths as a way to keep your property. So it shows one thing. Lincoln is not like Thaddeus Stevens. Lincoln is not envisioning Reconstruction as a social revolution other than the social revolution of abolishing slavery. In fact, Lincoln seems to think that these well-to-do Southerners, particularly in Louisiana, are the ones who will really come back to the Union. Old Whigs, merchants, well-to-do planters, people he used to know when he was in Congress as a Whig. He thinks they're the ones who can take the lead. In a sense, one of the differences between Lincoln and the Radicals is this judgment: who are the loyal population of the South? Lincoln thinks that there is a significant cadre, of white Southerners, particularly these better well-off Whigs who can come back in. Radicals say, no, the whites are all rebels. It's the black population that can be trusted to be the basis of a real Reconstruction. So anyway, okay, when 10% of the voters from 1860, now that's all whites, of course, when 10% of the voters from 1860 take this oath, then the process will go on to set up a new government. There can be an election. Anyone who took the oath can vote in the election, and a new state government will be established. That new state government must abolish slavery. It can't be recognized, but other than that, it can do anything it wants. In fact, Lincoln again offers a significant incentive. He says they must abolish slavery, but they can also pass any provision in relation to the freed people of such state which shall recognize and declare their permanent freedom, provide for their education, and which shall yet be consistent as a temporary arrangement with their present condition as a laboring, landless, and homeless class. So some kind of temporary, what does he mean, a temporary condition? Well, the British did that in the West Indies in the 1830s. When they abolished slavery, they set up a 5-year system of what they called apprenticeship, where the former slaves would be free, but not totally free. As apprentices, they'd still be under the control of their owners. They'd still have to work on their plantations. The theory was that this would be a transition. They'd learn free labor in this apprenticeship period. It was a total disaster, because the slaves did not want to be apprentices. They wanted to be free. And the owners didn't want them to be free. They wanted them to be slaves. So they kept treating them as slaves, not as apprentices who were free. And the system completely fell apart within 3 or 4 years. Lincoln seems to be envisioning something like that. Oh, by the way, there had also been systems of apprenticeship in the North as part of the gradual abolition of slavery in the North. But blacks were completely opposed. They wanted to be free, and they did not want to be under the control in any way of their former owners.